Guys, what's up? So we continue the discussion of economic survey. We have done the volume 1, chapter 1 of the volume 1, and we have discussed everything there is to know about the chapter 1, so you don't need to study beyond that. Now we are going to discuss chapter number 2 of economic survey, and in this particular chapter it talks about basically a new bird's eye exciting view of the Indian economy through the GST. So GST has been implemented recently in India. So what are the impacts? So economic survey analyze all that. So let us get started. So guys, this is the lesson and we are going to discuss the new exciting bird's eye view of the Indian economy through the GST. So these are the things which we are going to cover in this particular lesson. So let us get started. So GST is an information repository because it has like a lot of data is being generated. So long elusive which we are not able to access, some basic facts about the Indian economy has come to fore. So obviously because of GST there has been increase in the number of indirect taxpayers. And many have voluntarily chosen to be part of GST, and especially it includes the small enterprises which buys from the large enterprises. And distribution of the GST base among the states is closely linked to their GDP. Okay, GDP means gross domestic product. So their states GDP. So it is like it has removed the fears of major producing that the shift to the new system will undermine their tax collection. So this is absolutely baseless. So that has not done that. And there is new data on the international exports of states suggests that there is a strong correlation between the standard of the living of the state and their export performance. So those states who perform better in export, they have higher standard of living. And India's exports are unusual that the largest firms account for a much smaller share than in other comparable countries. And internal trade is about 60% of the GDP, and it is even greater than estimated in the last year survey, and it compares very favorably with other large countries. So just remember that internal trade is about 60% of the GDP, and it is comparable to the other large countries. And our formal sector non-farm payroll is very higher than currently believed. So these new facts have come to light, and formally it is defined in terms of the social security, and it yields an estimate of formal sector of about 31% of the, I'm talking about the non-agricultural workforce, so 31% of them are formalized. And in terms of being part of the GST suggests a formal sector payroll out of 53%. Okay. So these are some of the numbers which have come out. So obviously like goes without saying that the taxpayers have increased. There is not a single doubt in my mind that the taxpayer number have increased, and the number of unique indirect taxpayers have been increased by more than 50%. And like 34 lakh new people have come, and greatest number of GST registrants are through obviously the big state, Maharashtra, UP, Tamil Nadu, Gujarat. And UP and West Bengal have seen increases in the number of tax registrants compared to the old tax regime. So this is also good. Now GST base and its distribution in these states. So Maharashtra contributes 16%, Tamil Nadu 10%, Karnataka 9%, UP 7%, Gujarat 6%. So these are either the states who have huge population and huge trade. And each state share in the GST is almost perfectly correlated with its overall GDP of the state. So GSDP means gross state domestic product. So it is pretty clear that the biggest tax base will be in the biggest producing states like Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Gujarat, etc. But GST tax base cannot be related to the consumption base of the state. Okay. And because they suffer from significant underreporting of consumption by richer households, they don't report it that much. So that data is flawed. And let's talk about the size distribution of inter-firm transaction. So like below threshold is less than 20 lakh rupees, below composition threshold is 20 to 100 lakh. It is based on their annual turnover and so on. So large firm is anything where the annual turnover is above 100 crore. So registered smaller firms, the first three category, they are equally involved in selling to consumers and selling to other firms. Okay, so B2C, B2B. Medium and large firms are more B2B than B2C, and small B2C firms wants to be part of the GST because they buy from the bigger companies. Now let us talk about international trade, interstate trade and economic prosperity. So this year GST has provided direct data on interstate trade. So for the first time in our history, it is possible to know the state-wise distribution of international exports of goods and services, which was not there earlier, and it is largely thanks to GDP. So 5 states, Maharashtra, Gujarat, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Telangana. So they account for 70% of India's exports. This is the order. 70% of India's exports. And states GSDP per capita is also related with export share. I have already told you this. And one major outlier is Kerala. This is mainly because it gets a lot of remittances from the Middle East countries. And last year's survey estimated that our interstate trade is good, and it was between 30 and 50% of GDP, and it is much higher as compared to other countries also. Now India's internal trade in goods and services is actually even higher, about 60% of the GDP. And the 5 largest exporting states in interstate trade includes Maharashtra, Gujarat, Haryana, Tamil Nadu and Karnataka. Earlier one was an international trade, this is interstate. The 5 largest importing states are Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, UP, Karnataka and Gujarat. So those like USA is producer also, importer also, something like that. States with largest internal trade surpluses are Gujarat, Haryana, Maharashtra, Odisha and Tamil Nadu. And the correlation of per capita GSDP is much higher with international exports than with interstate trade. So those who do international exports more, they are more prosperous. So there are a lot of export superstars, those firms that account for a disproportionately large share of exports. Okay, and they have a huge influence also, and they create comparative advantage for themselves. And no such analysis was possible, but now it is possible. So export concentration is much lower in India than in USA, Germany, Brazil. For example, top 1% of firms accounted for 72%, 68%, 55% of exports in these countries. But in India, the top 1% companies just account for 38%, which is very less. It is much more egalitarian in India. And VR sector is obviously informal, everybody knows it. So we can define it in 2 ways, that those employees which have some kind of social security like EPFO, Employee Provident Fund Organization, okay, it even provide to private sector employees, and employees state insurance corporation in case of medical benefits. So EPFO contribution is mandatory for industries which have more than 20 workers, and ESIC contribution is mandatory for certain firms. Okay, so there is second definition also, which are part of the tax bracket or not. So since GST is available, one can easily define tax formality, those who are registered under GST. So 0.6% of the firms which account for 63% of the GST are in the hardcore formal sector. Okay, 87% of the firms are purely informal, which is outside of both tax and social security, and 12% of the firms are give their tax but not the social security. So these are some of the facts. And finally, less than 0.1% of the firms, they account for 14% of the turnover. Okay, that is huge in the social security net but not in the GST net, which means they are not there. And these firms are in the GST exempted sector, that's why they don't have to pay GST, like education, health, electricity, etc. Okay, non-farm payroll, so nearly 53% of the non-agricultural workforce, which are 24 crore people, they are in the formal sector. Okay, so this chapter has just given hints based on the GST analysis, and once the more and more data comes, we will be able to analyze it in a much better way. So thank you for watching this lesson. Have an awesome day.